So when you look at the world, you'll see the majority of the world is mineral. Is that true? The earth itself, the sea. Okay. So if you were a rock, okay, hello. Hello. Okay. So we're talking about purposefulness. If you were a rock, how would you spend your day? You would spend your day doing what? If you were a rock, you would just be. But in fact, you're supporting the next level of life, right? So all vegetation is supported by mineral life. Okay, so let's move beyond being a rock. For some of us, that's like, oh no, I was so happy as a rock. Okay. Okay, a plant. What are some things a plant can do that a rock can't do? Can grow? Tell me more. Can die. Could die. Tell me more. Reproduce, photosynthesize, flower. Okay, so it's much more active. Okay, but in terms of amount, there's far more mineral life than there is vegetation. Okay? Okay, so now you're focused on your favorite animal. What are some things that your favorite animal could do that a plant can't do? Eat. What? Play. See, hear, move, get from one place to another, reproduce consciously, have a sense of belonging to its own species, primitive emotion, some level of communication, certainly. It's a lot more. Okay, so again, the majority is mineral life, which supports vegetation, which supports animal life, which is much less than vegetation. All of these, in turn, support human life. So what are some things that a human can do that an animal can't do? Okay, another thing that you would say that humans can do, our level of conversation is different than animal communication. Even dolphins would never have a conversation like this one. Okay, what are some other differences? We're more creative in a certain sense, we're more communicative in a certain sense, we think more deeply.
Altruistic.
Hmm?
Like we can
Ah.
think of others about their own gain
We could make choices that don't benefit ourselves for the sake of others, which animals cannot do. They will preserve the pack or the species, but that's because from their perspective, their identification with the pack and species is absolute. But you won't find a giraffe picking a leaf, looking downwards and saying to a panda, "It's really good." Okay. So this is the pyramid. Now, if you were to take anything from the lowest level out of the world, it would be a disaster. Could you see where this is so? If you were to take animal species out of the world, it would be disastrous. If you were to take humans off the planet, what would happen? Nicer, greener. Okay. So the question is, why are we here? So again, nothing makes itself. So this pyramid came from somewhere. Nothing makes itself, and the interdependency of the pyramid is absolute. Do any of you know what anthropics is? It's a field within biology. It's the study of humans from a biological perspective. So what that means is the study of how many different biological components would you have to have work simultaneously for even one person to exist. So if you go back, for instance, to Darwin, he had a problem with the eyelid and the eye. Are you familiar with this problem? Gosh, which came first? With their eyes that were like drying out and being blinded within a few days, saying, well, if I only had a shield, if I only had a shield. Or with their eyelids uselessly flapping around for eons, just saying, gosh, I have no sense of purpose. Okay, so his conclusion is that they had to come about simultaneously. Now, Darwin lived around 200 years ago. Today, how many things have to be there simultaneously? What kind of numbers are we talking about? Tens? Thousands. So clearly the existence of a human being is part of a very intricate and involved vision of what the creation is meant to be. So the question is, what are we here for?
Maybe to transform with
Could be,
Spiritually.
since we have spiritual capacity. Okay, certainly would have to do with spiritual capacity, but I want to throw an axiom at you, and if you could accept that axiom, good, and if not, we have to argue it out a little bit. When you say something is good, you mean it does do what it can do. If I say this is a good pen, I mean it writes. So if it could whistle Dixie but it can't write, it wouldn't be a good pen. These keys are good because they open doors. If they also act as good back scratchers, that's fine, but, okay, clear? So I want to change your definition of a good human being. Now, in order to tell you why this is important, many people, like anyone who studies sociology knows this, it's fun to go amongst people with a microphone. People psychologically have a need to answer questions that they're asked, even if they're very personal. If someone thrusts a mic in their face, have you seen this? So suppose you were to go and ask somebody, are you a good person? What do you think most people answer, yes or no? Yes. Now suppose the follow-up question is, what makes you a good person? What do you think people would say? What would you say?
Not hurting people.
Not hurting people. Almost all of the people who were surveyed give negative answers. I don't steal, I don't kill, I don't act aggressively to people for no reasons. But neither does a corpse. Okay, a corpse doesn't steal, doesn't kill, isn't aggressive, doesn't rape. Okay, right? So I would say that that definition doesn't work with what I just said. To talk about being a good person using the same criteria by saying these are good keys because they open doors, a good person would have to be someone who uses what people can do. A person who's creative, a person who's moral, a person who's articulate, a person who thinks deeply. Could you see where that makes sense? Okay. So that's Judaism's definition of a good person. A person who's truly human. So now we're going to digress and talk about the different components of being a human. We're going to take being a human apart a little bit. So the reason why this is important to talk about is different aspects of who you really are sometimes try to grab your whole identity, but there's a specific path from a Judaic perspective that which part of your identity should come from which voice. So the most basic statement of who you are is you're the person who you look like you are, your body. So if you ask a kindergarten child, who are you? She'll give you her name. You say, but who is Janie? So I'm a girl. So you say, yeah. I have yellow hair. I'm wearing, okay, yeah? She'll give you a physical definition because she's a little girl. Okay, so part of who you are is your physical definition. Make no mistake about this. So when a person says the real me isn't my body, that's not completely true. Your body is part of you. Okay, your soul has no expression without a body. And because of this, in Judaism, most of the mitzvot are physical, because the body is also you. Okay, so you've all been at religious homes for Shabbos, right? What does a religious living room look like? They all look alike. Okay, no? You're in?
Huge bookcase.
Huge bookcase, yeah. And what else is there?
A couch.
A couch and a table. There has to be a table because you have to have guests. So it can't be like some secular living rooms where there's only the L-shaped couch and a TV and decorative items and paintings. There has to be a bookshelf. There has to be a table. Okay, you there? Now suppose you're there the first time, you see the books. Do you see big sets of matching books? Did you ever ask anybody what they are?
No.
Okay, so suppose you weren't, you're English, right? You would never ask people what books are on your shelf. It's like, you don't do that. But like suppose any of you from California? Now if you were Californian, you would have no problem. You could ask anything in California. So you say, like, what are these books? And what do you think they are? Odds are, one of the big sets is a set of Talmud. Remember yesterday we learned what Talmud is. The other is going to be a big set, 14 volumes of what? Who's the 14 volume one? We learned this yesterday. Rambam, right? So suppose the person then, who rather rudely asked what the books are, then picks up, like, what's that book about? Odds are it's either going to be about business relationships, like what's considered yours, what's considered somebody else's, contract law, stuff like that. Or it's going to be about food, kosher, not kosher. Or it's going to be about mikveh. Or it's going to be about blessings. Okay, so suppose they go through a whole bunch of them, and they're all about concrete reality. They say, well, where's your volume on transcendental meditation? Do you think that there is a whole volume of Talmud? There isn't. There are parts in which this is discussed, but I want to tell you why. Your body is what your soul needs to find expression. The difference between Judaism and other religions is that the body is not dismissed as not being somehow other. The body is not the enemy. There are laws of taking good care of your body, treasuring your body, because without your body, your soul has no way of self-expression. But your body is not your soul. Above that, we have emotions. Okay, give me a reasonable definition of the word emotion. Feelings. So what emotions are to the soul is like what touch is to the body. It's experiential. From a Judaic perspective, all emotions, all of the huge spectrum of emotion flow from two basic ones. What do you think they are? The most basic emotions.
Sadness, happiness.
What?
Perhaps sadness, happiness?
Sadness, happiness. I would take it a little more basic even. You're good though, yeah?
I would say hunger, thirst, like survival-based
Okay.
emotions.
Well, hunger and thirst are physical. They're not
The
emotional.
feeling of,
Okay. So I'll get there. Okay, you're both on the right track. There's the desire for connection, and there's the need to achieve, and fear of failure. So fear of failure could be fear of physical failure, I'll die. It could be fear of financial failure, any kind of fear of God. Love could be love of any kind of connection, love of a human being, love of what you're doing. All of the other emotions flow down from those two. That makes sense to you? Emotions in Judaism are your friends, they're not your enemies. So the Greeks saw emotions as weakness. Your English, that a lot of the Greek heritage carried through to England via the Germans. Okay, you know, the Greeks were conquered by Rome, which led to the Jordanians. Okay, the English royal family is German, you know this. So the vision of emotion is weak is coming from a foreign source. In Judaism, emotions are your friends. Emotions hear your mind. So whether you're afraid or not depends on the message your mind is giving to your emotions. So you could have two people in the same exact situation who feel very differently because of the different messages their mind is giving them. So I'll give you an example of this. Let's say you have a scientist who's working in a laboratory. And you know what, I'm not going to give you this. I'm going to tell you a true story, something I did. So here I am, first year I married, okay? I was married at 18, okay? Here I am, first year, first Pesach. So this was a very long time ago. In Israel in those days, they didn't have fancy cleaners. They had basically two house cleaners. One was called Amma, it was a liquid soap. Amma means female slave. Okay, Israel was never good at PR, okay? Okay, so you could buy Amma in a bottle, and the other was called Economica, which is bleach. So my housekeeping skills were non-existent when I got married. I had never done anything. I'm an only child. Nothing. The word nothing, whatever you're thinking, nothing, it means even less than that. Nothing, okay? So I'm keeping house and doing my best. And here it is, my first Pesach. And I know you have to clean the house to see that you have no crumbs around, nothing from bread. So I had no idea where to begin. So I began by taking all the furniture out of the bedroom, cleaning, and then, gosh, I'm too tired to continue. Okay, putting back. So here it is, just a few days before Pesach, I didn't even start the kitchen, which is the main thing. So my husband's friend, who came from a family. He said, you know, I think maybe I'll come and help you a day or two because this kitchen's going to take some doing. Okay. So I didn't know, in my absolute absence of knowledge, I have a stove, right? So sometimes things boil over, especially when you don't know how to cook. There's the burners that the fire come out of, and there's a circle around them, and then there's a metal covering. Where does it go when it boils over? Gosh, where is all that stuff? I never thought about it. So we just cleaned the stove top, and so he says to me, you know, it's going to be Pesach soon. You have all this stuff in like under the cover. Maybe it's time to like clean it. Have you cleaned it this past week? This past week? I haven't cleaned it this past year. I didn't even know it comes up. I'm like, okay. So there's like, it's this thick of like all sorts of gook and horrific, like, you know, every possible food that ever boiled over. And it's solid because of the heat of the stove, okay? Now really in terms of Pesach cleaning, I don't have to clean it, there's nothing edible there. But I didn't know that then, and he didn't either. How am I going to clean this? So the Amma wasn't doing it, the Economica wasn't doing it. So I decided I'm going to go to the big store downtown that has things that are imported, and maybe I'll get oven cleaner. So I went there, they didn't have oven cleaner. So I asked the woman, what should I do? So she suggested I buy ammonia. Okay, so I decided, any of you know chemistry? You know what's going to happen now?
Boom, chemical reactions.
That's right. If you mix bleach and ammonia, you make toxic fumes. Okay, so I of course immediately mixed them together. The kitchen fills with these horrific fumes. This man who's helping me, my husband's friend, passed out immediately. I dragged him out of the kitchen, opening the kitchen window at the same time, okay, so we wouldn't kill the whole building. Okay. And this is when my husband comes home. I'm in the living room. This guy is passed out on the floor. I'm hoping that I didn't kill him. And I said, it was the cleanser. Okay, so the reason I'm telling you this horrific story is that the message that a chemist would get was not a message my brain could convey to me, because I didn't know that I was. If a chemist was there in the kitchen with me, he would say, don't mix them! Okay, clear? So everything depends on your mind. So I want to tell you from a Judaic perspective, the way you relate to the different fragments of self. Do any of you know any Hebrew at all?
Yeah.
You're familiar with the word melech? What does it mean? That's right. So here it's an acronym for these words. The word for brain in Hebrew is moach. The brain should lead. The brain speaks to lev. Do you know what lev is? Heart. The heart's your friend. Remember this, emotions are not enemies, but they receive their instructions from the mind. And together, they should instruct the body and let the body follow their commands. When a person is working backwards, where their body informs their emotions, and the mind is excluded or not, or barely heard, you have an unsuccessful life. When you have the emotions not hearing anything, you're living an unsuccessful life. Melech, moach, lev, kaved. The word kaved means liver. What does your liver do? If you were a liver, how would you spend your day? It detoxes. How? By separating what's good from what's not, what's desirable from what's harmful. That's what your body should be doing continually. If a person is brain dead, their heart is not going to continue operating. So the heart does have its own system, it has a systemic base, but in the end, it does receive instructions from the brain, because the heart, the material from which the heart is made of is cells, right? What? Everything is made from cells. For cells to reproduce themselves, they require reception from the brain. So on a cellular level, the heart, like everything else, depends on the brain sending messages of survival and reproduction. However, as you know, as you learned obviously from what you're saying, the heart has its own system. The system itself is independent of the brain, but if a person is brain dead, the heart won't function. Okay, clear? The heart, in the end, is the captain of the ship. You're going to do what your heart tells you. But the brain should be the navigator. A captain who doesn't hear the navigator is in bad shape. That makes sense to you? Okay. So what does this have to do with what we were talking about yesterday and the day before when we were talking about basics? So he said that the world didn't make itself, nothing makes itself. There's a hidden hand. The hidden hand made human beings in a way in which being a good human requires melech, moach lev kaved. Okay. So on some level, humans always had some level of cognizance of there being something beyond themselves. Is that true? Any of you studied anthropology? If you were to study anthropology, you would know there's never been a civilization in which basic religious belief was non-existent. People on a deep level know nothing makes itself. Now what they do with that realization is very, very independent. So what I'm going to talk about today from this point onward is Avraham and his path, idol worship, and alternatives paths. So here's Avraham's story. So Avraham was born at a time in the Bronze Age when Hammurabi was the ruler of what today would be Iraq. Okay? He had a dream. His Hebrew name was Nimrod, which he saw a child born this day is going to usurp my power, so he declared that all the children born that day should die. Could this happen in today's Middle East? Probably. Okay, whatever. Avram's parents hate him because parents are funny this way. They don't like to have their children killed. So when he was 3, the law was rescinded because it doesn't look good on the books. How many of you know real 3-year-olds? Not book 3-year-olds, but actual real 3-year-olds. You know a real 3-year-old? Anybody else?
Like
In life?
Yeah.
Okay. So for 3-year-olds who never saw color, texture, whatever, he was living in a cave, were to see this, how would they respond? Fear. Okay. Okay. Interest. I once saw a picture that captured something like this. Do you like photography? Did any of you ever see, it's a classic, did any of you see People of the World? It's an old photographic classic. Okay, there's People of the World and then Children of the World. Very amazing pictures from way back. So in Children of the World, they had a picture of a little girl who was fitted with hearing aids. In those days, hearing aids were like enormous. And with her hearing aid, which she was just fitted with, they had her buy a Victrola. You know what a Victrola is? It's like a record player that had this horn-like thing coming out of it to project the sound. So the person, before the picture was taken, pressed the on button, and she heard music for the first time. What do you think she looked like? Capture her face. What do you think she looked like? It was an amazing photograph. So that was Avraham. You understand, like he's looking at the world. Now 3-year-olds were also very territorial. So he would ask, like, whose is this? So his father related everything to the sun. So the sun is the source of energy, of heat, of light. But Avraham, who was only 3, said, who made the sun? Okay, so, which posed a problem to his father. So I'm going to leave Avram alone for a minute. I'm going to tell you a true story that happened to me with my child, my eldest son, whose name is Yitzchak. So when he was 4, he came home from preschool, and he said, Ani Avraham, I'm Avraham. He decided that that's who he is. Okay. Said, good, better than Batman, better than, like. So to be Avraham, he had to go to the linen closet and drape himself in a sheet. Okay. So then, we lived in a religiously mixed neighborhood at the time. He decided he's going to convert everyone to belief in one God. But he didn't share this plan with me. So I thought he was just like playing on the porch with his sheet on. But he escaped the house through the back porch, which had an alternative entrance. went to the parallel building. So he had a little secular friend, his age, a girl. So he knocks on her door, and he says, yeah, who made everything? Now, she also goes to preschool, so she knows. So she said, Teva. Everything comes from Teva. You have enough Hebrew to know Teva?
It's a company. A big company.
It's a big company, but do you know what the word means? No. Teva is nature. The company makes drugs, so they consider themselves like, Okay, so at that point in my life, I had an aerobics class in my house, and the name of the aerobic leader was Teva. It's an Israeli name. So he's hearing her say, everything comes from Teva. She meant nature. That's the word they used in her preschool. So he says, who made Teva? No, he means the aerobic teacher. So she's thinking, gosh, who did make nature? Okay. So she says, Teva was always there. Now, does that make sense to him? No. She says, no! How did Teva get there? Okay. Now, neither of them were old enough to know about human reproduction, so it couldn't be from her mommy and her daddy. You know what I mean? So, like, they didn't know. So she goes inside and to ask her parents, like, who made Teva? So father's like an important guy in Israel broadcasting, so far left that like he could fall off the edge. And this little girl says, who made Teva? And he's told about this lady. So I was watching TV. There's a very popular news show in Israel called Mabat. I was just watching Mabat, minding my business. And my little girl comes and who made Teva? So I told her, I said, Teva are like things that always were. They're rules that just always were. But when you're 4, are you going to buy that? No. So she didn't buy it. She said, like, but how did it come there? So he's realizing this is a sophisticated question. He said, who asked you that question? So he said, my friend from the other building, the religious building, okay? So he said he was furious. Like, what are they doing, trying to missionize to children? So he says, well, where's your friend? So he got up. Who did he expect to see by the door? Like what? A man, or like at least a teenager. Instead, there's like this 4-year-old, and he says, who are you? And what does he say? I'm Avram. Who made everything? He said, this is every secular parent's nightmare. So he just said, go home, Avram. Your mother's probably looking for you. You know? So they were sort of like left, in question. But the real Avraham actually went through a similar process. He got unsatisfactory answers from his father. He kept the question. He worshipped idols as a child with his parents. He did whatever they wanted him to do. But by the time he was 15, which is a long time to hold a question, here's what he knew. He knew that the idols are a distraction from the search for what brought everything about. So he knew what wasn't true, but he didn't know what is true, which is not an unusual thing. Oftentimes people have to find out who they're not before they know who they are, right? So I'm going to digress and talk to you briefly about idol worship. Why did anybody ever worship an idol? Didn't you ever wonder about this? Like, if I made the idol in the afternoon, did I think it made me in the morning? Like, what's going on? So here's the story of how idol worship evolved. People always had sensitivity to this, that nothing makes itself. The forces that they could see easily are the forces of nature. Did any of you do yoga and do salute to the sun? So the next step is actually showing regard to nature and feeling connection to nature as a path of finding connection to the ultimate force, right? Okay, next step down. You can't take sunrise with you wherever you go. Okay, so there are people who say, retain this idol or this image or this talisman, and that'll remind you of the higher forces, and you could relate to them through this. This is how idols came about. The next step is people get so involved in whatever other people tell them about how to worship this force that they forget that it's supposed to lead them further. Okay, clear? So all of the idols and icons that you see in any possible culture are pictures of forces. People tend to make the force a picture of whatever they admire in themselves. So in Christianity, Jesus is a picture to them of compassion and love, which is the force that they see as the most beautiful and central. And they see humans as being the ones who have that more than, let's say, animals or plants. In Hinduism, you have the Hindu Trinity, where they have the force of life, the force of death, and the force of maintained nurture, which is what they would see as central. And those forces they center in their belief system, both in their mythological beings, Krishna and company, but also in various actual natural forces. Okay, Ganesh, the elephant, whatever. Okay, so taking this further, okay, Avram rejected that because he knew what he knew at 3, which is everything came about through another force. But he didn't know what that force was. By the time he was 48, that's a long time, here are the conclusions he drew. Whatever the initial force was, it's not something physical, because all physical things come from existent physical things. And therefore can't be more than one, and therefore can't be described. But it made people with the capacity to search and make moral choices, and therefore my part of the plan is to search and make moral choices. So that's what he came to that other religious thinkers didn't get to. They got almost as far as that, but not far. So I want to illustrate this. Buddha and Avram lived in more or less the same time. Did you know that? Isn't that interesting? Okay, there's a time difference, but it's less than 200 years. Okay, so Buddha got as far as understanding that there's force that brought everything about, and that through meditation you could feel a connection to the force. But that you should actually make moral choices, didn't get there. So if you were to look at Avraham and Buddha, let's say at 11 in the morning on a given day, what would Buddha be doing? Meditating. What would Avram be doing? Cutting vegetables because guests are going to come soon, because he wanted to feed the hungry. You understand this? That's the difference between Avram and Buddha, and indeed that's the difference between Judaism and other religions. So this is why the hospitality narrative in the Torah of Avram's hospitality is the longest Avraham narrative. Saying, and this is how you find your place in God's narrative of you, by doing acts of kindness. So hospitality was the first one that he latched onto, but there are a whole spectrum of acts of kindness that are Judaic. So I'm going to spend the rest of the class running you through kindness from a Judaic view. Okay? First one of the mitzvot of kindness is indeed hospitality. It's a mitzvah to seek guests, have them, feed them, give them to drink, give them a place to stay, and accompany them out. When you're doing that, 2 things are happening. You're benefiting them, and you're becoming more godlike because you're in sync with his plan for you, and more similar to God, who's in the ultimate sense the host of the world. Okay, clear? Okay, next. The next one is visiting the sick. Okay, so when a person visits the sick, the word for that, and he was bikur cholim, levaker, means to visit. It also means something else. Do you know what levaker's other meaning is? Bikoret?
Bikoret?
Yes.
That's a visit.
A bikur is a visit. Bikoret is criticism.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so what does it mean, criticize the sick? No, it means look at their situation critically and see what's really needed. So if what they need is a social visit, then be there socially. But if that's not what they need. They need someone to bring food into the house, bring food. If they need somebody to change their linen, change their linen. If they need money, give them money. You have to look at their situation critically and see what's needed. So it's for them as opposed to filling your empty space and desire for connection. This is clear? So visiting the sick is therefore considered to be as close as a human can get to reviving the dead, which clearly God does in nature continually. Right? Things die and then come back. Right? Plants, whatever. Okay, so Avraham got into that as well. Next one. Next one is helping people get married. Okay, why is that considered an important act of kindness?
So the generation will continue.
To be part of the creative process and to do it in a way that's kind so that people find each other not only physically, like man, woman, but emotionally and intellectually as well. Okay, clear? Next one, taking care of the needs of the dead. Why is that considered important?
So they can move on. So their soul can move on.
So they
Their
can,
soul can move on.
so their soul could move on, which is a great act of kindness. So this is what Avram dedicated his life to. So in the basic sense, this is what Judaism is about. But Avraham was only the first in a chain. He had two sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. One of them kept his heritage and the other one changed it. What do you know about Arab culture and Islamic belief? What? Okay, so the first thing I want you to know is that in Islam there is a belief in one God. Okay, so they have that part. But it doesn't take them to seeing life as sacred necessarily. So they draw different conclusions. Okay, Islam is, from their perspective, is all about power. It's a very power-oriented religion. Judaism is not about power. What's it about?
Connection with God.
What?
Connection with God.
Connection. It's a very different approach. So Yishmael is who he is. There's potential in it. There's potential in that world. But it wasn't used at that time. So the next link in the chain was Yitzchak. So Yitzchak started where Avram left off. He didn't have to start like with, and who made the sun? Where did he start with? How come I don't feel God on the inside? Why is it all through searching on the outside? Who made this and who made that? What's going on inside? So the conclusion that he reached is that on the inside you have to overcome other forces that block you. So his trait is called gvura, which means strong. Because the idea of overcoming desires, impulses, escapism, this is what he brought into the world. So if you're going to say, if you need a one-word description of Avram's path, the word would be yes. If you would need a one-word description of Yitzchak's path, it would be no, not here, not there. I'm going to define who I am, not be defined. Clear? Okay, so he also had two sons. Okay, Yaakov and Esav. Esav is the ancestor of the West. Similar to Islam, but without what I consider to be the redeeming cause of monotheism. The Western culture is also very power-oriented. Could you see where this is so? If you were to take bloodshed out of all Western literature and art, movies, media, what would you have left? Not much. Okay. Mickey Mouse. Okay. Okay. But no knights around the round table. I remember as a child not having asked what the knights do. It never occurred to me. Like, why would somebody have, these great spears that they carried, the armor? They were killing people the whole time. It was just, the age of chivalry was a bloody and horrific era. Okay, so Yaakov is the one who carried on the heritage. Yaakov had 12 sons and a daughter. His main ability was to see the truth of Hashem in any person. So even though he had many children and they were all different one from the other, he was able to give each one of them a path using individual means of how to know God and keep and serve him. So that's the final touch of what makes Judaism Judaism. So not only do you serve Hashem not only with your mind and your heart, but also with your body, but everyone could find Hashem in their own way. There isn't one image. So I can't resist telling you a terrible joke. I'm warning you that it's a bad joke. This goes back to the medieval era where there was no literacy at that point hardly except in the monasteries. So there was a monastery. There was a young monk who was copying manuscripts under the guidance of an old monk. So the young monk says to the old monk, what if you made a mistake? I'm copying it, and other people will copy my manuscripts. How do you know you didn't make a mistake? So the old monk said, well, periodically I check all of the manuscripts against the really ancient ones in the cellar. So the young monk said, look, I've been here for 4 years. I've never seen you go down to the cellar. How often do you really check it? So the old monk felt bad, and he said, I'll tell you the truth, I never check it, but I really should. So he went down with the manuscripts to the cellar to check them against the ancient manuscripts, okay? He came up, his eyes are red, he's clearly been crying. Okay, so the young monk said, did you make a mistake? He said, yes. He said, what's the mistake? He said, I thought it said celibate, but it said celebrate. Okay, sorry. So the reason I'm telling you this terrible joke is that the Christian image of piety has to do with poverty, chastity, and obedience, as you know. The Eastern vision of piety has to do with transcendence of everything worldly. The Judaic vision of piety has to do with being in the real world and making it something. So now that we know what God is, what the foundations of Judaism are, next class is going to be on what the Torah is and what it's telling us. Okay? So save your questions about what the Torah is for next class. Okay, that's it for now.